Mm. Now, Margaret, I just want to build on one topic because, of course, the super chicken concept also comes back to creating powerful cultures, right? And I know you, just like me, have a really ambivalent relationship to technology, which I think a lot of people claims it is here to change and improve culture. I have a nagging feeling of that you kind of the opposite opinion about this topic. Share with me what the role of technology is, how it is, I think, destroying culture, and how you navigate this right now.
So I'll just tell you one story about a company I worked with, which, we'd done a lot of strategy work. We'd kind of worked on the product offering. We looked at the market. We looked at, the sales process, all of that sort of stuff. And there was only one thing left to talk about, which was people. And the CEO said to me, well, we've got our engagement data, and it shows that it's going up. And I said, well, from what to what? He said, well, from 59 to 62%. And so what does that mean? It may just mean all the people who hated working here have left. And the point is that because he was relying on technology to poll his people and do the survey and monitor the people and see, who was staying late and who was working hard, he was completely depending on technology for his communication and his sense of how the organization was functioning. The consequence of that was he didn't know anything about what was going on in his organization. He didn't know why the numbers had moved. He didn't know if it meant anything. And after we kind of made that clear, he said, well, then how would I know? And I left this pregnant pause for as long as I could, thinking, oh, come on, this is so obvious. And finally, I broke the news to him that the way he would find out would be if he actually talked to people. And there was this kind of stunned silence. And I think, as we're all so busy emailing and texting and, doing all this stuff and Zooming and we have kind of forgotten that in the face-to-face moment of talking to somebody and getting to know them over time and building trust and developing generosity and reciprocity and starting to know people as people, not just, places on the org chart or just titles. If you really know people, then you start really to understand and to get great, rich communication about them, about the environment, about the culture, complex information of a kind that technology dumbs down so that it has a kind of simple authority, which is totally misleading. And it's very well understood in technology, and bear in mind, I used to work in technology, right, that when we use devices, we're essentially outsourcing to a machine what we used to do ourselves. Now, if I think of my smartphone, I don't know my kids' phone numbers, but I'm okay. I'm very fine with outsourcing all those numbers I used to have to keep in my head. I'm not comfortable outsourcing my capacity to have a human conversation with somebody. I'm not comfortable learning to shout at Alexa and forgetting how to talk confidentially to a human being. So there's always a trade-off in the way that we use tech, and we have to think about at what point is it a good trade-off? Happy not to have a head full of phone numbers. At what point is it a bad trade-off? Very unhappy if I can't have a meaningful conversation with someone whom I know well because I've been talking this way for a long time.
A couple of reflections. I remember I did a session when I had feedback on all these people in this company, and it was a huge company and allegedly supposed to be successful. 11 of these people ended up being CEOs. They were like mega gods. While they all worked together, they were awful. Teamwork was zero. The company was losing money. It was a pretty famous example. It was so hilarious because they all ended up being really pretty good CEOs on their own, but they just couldn't get together at all. They reminded me a bunch of super chickens. I never thought about that concept, but it seemed so real. Another thing, I love your concept of willful blindness. I think it has been important in the past, but it's going to be much more important in the future. Can you just talk about why it matters so much?
Yeah, so willful blindness is a legal term. The law says that if there's knowledge that you could have had and should have had and somehow managed not to have, then you're deemed to be willfully blind because you had an opportunity for knowledge that you shirked, and you're responsible for the consequences. And I first encountered this when I was writing 2 plays for the BBC about the collapse of Enron. And I read the transcript of the trial of the chairman and chief executive. And the judge, in his summing up, cited this idea. And it was like a kind of magnet dropped into all the iron filings in my brain. Everything I'd ever read, thought, and seen kind of cohered around this idea. I thought about organizations, that were staring the future in the face and couldn't see it. On the day that Netscape went public, Microsoft didn't have a browser in development. When Facebook was growing by leaps and bounds, Google had no social networking offer at all. All these companies packed full of super smart people who could see things, somehow didn't see things. And I thought about other things, obviously the financial crisis, the crisis in the Catholic Church. I mean, I can go on and on and on. And, one reason I keep issuing new editions of the book is because the examples just are there over and over and over again. And I think it poses a very profound leadership question, which is, how is it in organizations that people who are smart and do have knowledge and do have goodwill somehow manage not to see what's obvious? And some of it is about obedience and conformity. Some of it is because they're simply too busy to think. That's quite common. Very long hours and fatigue are hugely implicated, but also a big part of it is what researchers call organizational silence. I do know there's a problem or a gigantic opportunity, but I'm afraid to speak up. And everybody feels the same way. And since nobody starts, the conversation that most needs to be had is never had.
Now, as we move on, I am so pleased to tell you a little bit more about humor and laughter, because our next guest is Sophie Scott, a professor in neuroscience. She's also researching the voice, speech, and laughter. She's published more than 200 papers on the behavioral psychology. And she's also, guess what, a stand-up comedian. I don't know how that works out, but we're going to find out. Welcome, Sophie.
Hi. Hello.
So listen, so good to have you here. I mean, you studied laughter. Tell me a bit about the psychology of laughter and why it is so powerful in a corporate context.
The psychology of laughter it's very interesting because it's all very counterintuitive. So we tend to think that laughter is about jokes and comedy and humor, and that's what makes us laugh. But actually, I mean, we do laugh at those things, but most of the laughter you produce is happening just because you're with other people. You're 30 times more likely to laugh if there's someone else with you than if you're on your own. And you'll laugh more if you know those people, and you'll laugh more if you like those people. So we think it's something to do with humor, and it is associated with humor, but it has this much bigger life, which is a social behavior. It's a social emotion. It's an emotion that lives in interactions with other people.